A new ranking just dropped. And once again, Lamar Jackson is right at the center of a heated NFL debate. This time, the controversy comes from a list that places him below names that, to a lot of fans, simply don't make sense in that order. And that raises a question you can't really ignore. What exactly are people using today to evaluate Lamar? Because when you actually look at what he does on the field for the Baltimore Ravens, the story feels very different from what shows up in these rankings. And that's exactly where this discussion starts to heat up. Every time I see Colin Cowherd putting together a quarterback list, my first thought is pretty simple. You can't ignore what Lamar Jackson does on the field. And yet, he shows up all the way down at 5th, which already feels off to me from the start. We're talking about the engine of the Baltimore Ravens offense, a guy who literally changes the game by himself. I'm not exaggerating. He breaks defenses with his arm, his speed, his quick decisions. He forces opponents to completely change how they play, and when you really understand that, it becomes hard to justify him being outside the top 3. What stands out to me is that this low ranking doesn't seem to come from a clear drop in performance, but more from a traditional idea of what a quarterback should look like. Cowherd even laid out his reasoning, and that's where things get even more interesting. He said, "The 3 best quarterbacks to me in the AFC feel like Allen, Mahomes, and Burrow. And the second you hear that, you can't help but think, all right, where does Lamar fit into all of this?" And that question leads straight into the next part. After placing Lamar Jackson only 5th, Colin Cowherd builds his top tier around 3 names: Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Joe Burrow, clearly separating them from the rest of the league. I completely understand Allen and Mahomes being in that group. Both have proven in multiple situations that they can take over games no matter the context, carrying entire offenses under extreme pressure, which naturally puts them in any elite QB conversation. What really stands out to me, though, is how this structure automatically pushes Lamar out of that first tier without a deeper look at actual on-field impact, almost like his playing style doesn't carry the same competitive weight in these rankings. And that becomes even more obvious when Cowherd summarizes it again. The 3 best quarterbacks, to me in the AFC, feel like Allen, Mahomes, and Burrow. That statement leaves very little room for nuance, and it naturally pushes the discussion toward Burrow versus Lamar, where things get a lot more intense. The matchup between Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson is always debated because you're looking at 2 elite quarterbacks with completely different ways of impacting the game in the NFL, which makes any direct comparison more complicated than it looks on the surface. On one side, Burrow operates in a more structured system with the Cincinnati Bengals, relying on quick reads, precise short and intermediate throws, and less dependence on physical improvisation, especially with weapons like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, which naturally makes the offense easier to execute at a high level. On the other side, Lamar often is the system for the Baltimore Ravens, carrying a much heavier creative load, since his mobility completely changes how plays are designed and forces defenses to adjust in ways very few quarterbacks can create in this league. From my perspective, this is exactly where some rankings start to get distorted, because you're measuring efficiency inside completely different offensive structures, and that directly affects how both players show up in best quarterback conversations, which leads into an even more controversial comparison. Justin Herbert being ranked above Lamar Jackson is probably the most debated part of Cowherd's list, because now we're not just talking about different styles, we're talking about overall impact over time in the league. Herbert is an extremely talented quarterback for the Los Angeles Chargers, with a big arm and the ability to make highlight-level throws under pressure, but his track record in terms of team success and defining moments still doesn't match the consistency we've seen from Lamar over multiple seasons. Lamar, beyond being a 2-time NFL MVP, has had seasons where he completely carried the Ravens offense at an elite level, changing the way every opponent has to prepare for him. And that's not just about potential, that's about real production on the field. And in my view, when you line those 2 profiles up, it becomes harder and harder to justify that reversal in the ranking, which naturally opens the door to the final layer of this discussion. If you're enjoying this breakdown, smash that like button to help the purple flock grow. Lamar Jackson has reached a point in his career where, honestly, questioning his impact shouldn't even be this complicated. He's a 2-time MVP, and the Baltimore Ravens offense completely shifts identity the moment he's on the Field. The issue I see with Coward's list is that it feels like Lamar constantly has to fit a traditional quarterback mold to be valued properly, while others automatically get placed ahead simply because they match that classic prototype more cleanly. And I'll be completely honest here, I don't really buy that. It's not about whether you can debate rankings, because you can. It's about how much weight you give to actual on-field impact, and in Lamar's case, what he does every week simply doesn't match being placed outside the top tier like this. To me, this kind of ranking says more about personal preference and quarterback archetypes than about what's actually happening in the NFL right now. Because when you strip everything away and just watch the games, Lamar's influence on the field is not something that should ever be treated like a fifth-place discussion. This whole Lamar Jackson ranking situation says a lot more than just where he lands on a list. It highlights the gap between how some analysts evaluate quarterbacks and what actually happens on the field when he plays for the Baltimore Ravens. At the end of the day, you can debate positions, compare names, argue criteria, but ignoring the impact Lamar has week after week just doesn't hold up when you actually watch the NFL play-by-play. Now I want to hear from you. In your opinion, is Lamar being underrated in these rankings, or does this placement actually make sense? Drop your take in the comments. And if you're a true Ravens fan and love keeping up with everything happening around the team, don't leave this video without sharing it with a friend who's just as passionate. They're definitely going to enjoy this. See those videos on your screen right now? I picked the first one especially for you, and the other is recommended by YouTube. Go check them out and I'll see you in the next video.